Hi all, today we are going to see about React Hooks interview questions. So these are the questions which we will be discussing as part of this session. We will understand why React Hooks first, and then before we go through what React Hooks provided to us. So if you take in React, we have been advised to use functional component as much as possible because they have less code and it has performance benefit, and it is also easily testable. But if you take in a functional component, you don't have access to state and lifecycle methods. For these reasons, we had to rely on class components, right? But with the help of with the introduction of React Hooks, we are able to do it all these in React Hooks in a functional component itself. You need not rely on a class component. We have access to, we can create our own state using useState, and we can also have the benefits of lifecycle methods using useEffect in React Hooks itself. So with this, we are getting the benefits of state and lifecycle methods in a functional component. Okay, that's why we are moving towards React Hook. So regarding useState React Hook, okay. So you know what is a state in React, right? State in React is some dynamic data, components dynamic data, and which determines the component behavior. The state may be something like username, password in a login page. So these are the components dynamic data. These are the values which may change dynamically based on what the user enters. So whatever the dynamic data is present in a component, we call it as state. So whenever the state changes, we refresh the component. That's how React works. Whenever the state changes, it refreshes the component. So whenever the user types in username or password, the login page refresh to show the new data. Okay. So what is useState React Hook? You would have heard of, you would have used state in case of class components in React. If you see an example for state component, you can see this example where a class component like this, the class component will have access to the state by default. So you need not do anything. So by default, the class component will have state within it. So the state in a class component you have to create like this. Maybe within it is nothing but a JavaScript object. Within that object you have you may have many states like username, password, employees, and so what. And what we do is whenever if you want to change the state, we use something like this. We want to change the state, we have to we can't give this dot state equal to the new value. You have to use this dot set state to change the state, particular state in the which is available in the this dot state in class component. If you want to change the employees state, I have to use like this dot set state, and employees the new value. Previously how it was like, only the class components was able to access the state and the functional component were not able to access the state. Whenever they want state, they will send back the values through props to the class component, and class component will change the state. That's how the functional component was used only for presentation. If it wants to change the state, it has to send back the value through props to class component that will change the state. But with the evolution of React Hooks, we are able to change the state with useState React Hook. With the introduction of React Hooks, we are able to bring in the state in functional component also. So how to use the state in a functional component is through this useState React Hook. So that's what the definition is: accessing the state variables in a functional component. So let's try to use it with a simple example. Okay, let me go to this where I have a simple functional component. Now let me have create a input button, and I will create a state for that, so that whenever the state changes, whenever I input some value in the input button, the component hook will refresh to show the value which I typed. Okay, let me have an input button here. Okay, input, maybe input. Okay, value, value something. Okay, now if you go to the screen, you will see this input button. If I am correct, you are seeing this input button, and if you see here, you are not able to update anything. Even if I try to update the value, I am not able to change it. I am trying to type, but it is not typed, because this is happening because this input button is not getting refreshed to show the new data. Okay, so this can be done by using state. Maybe we have to bring in a logic that whenever the state changes, I need to refresh this component. Okay, maybe to show it in the middle, I can use class name equal to the app. Okay, so let me now try to use useState here, and I will make sure that this input button, whenever the user types, this component gets updated to show the value which the user typed. So for using this React hook, you have to include the useState. You have to import useState from React. Okay, and here I will make use of useState. The one important difference you have to understand here is, here in the case of class component, if we see through that, you will say that the state is just always to the state. You have to give a JavaScript object. Inside that, you have to give the different states like employees, password, login. But in case of useState in functional component React hook, you can give any value. You can give a string, boolean, or a JavaScript object. So right now I want to use it for input button, so I will give a string. Maybe this will be my hello, will be my default value for this useState, for this state, and this will return two things. Okay, it will return the state, input state. Okay, the second is set input state, for setting the input state. It is similar to set state, what we do in class component, right? It is similar to that, and this gives access to the state. Okay, so now I have to make use of input state and set input state, right? So the value will be, I will try to use the input state. Okay, and set input state is on change. Sorry, we are just using the JSX on change event. Okay, it is a, if you see it in that tooltip, you will understand it is a JSX on change element. Whenever this input, somebody enters something on the on change on this input button, I am going to call the set input state. Okay, what we got it from the useState, right? So here I can use the event which is got from onChange. Okay, and here I will use event.target.value for accessing the value what the user entered. Okay. Okay. So I have used. Now every time somebody changes this input button, the value, this component should get re-rendered. Okay. So let me also put a console log so that you understand. Okay. And let us move to that browser screen now. See, now you are able to type. So here I have done a blunder mistake actually. If you see this, okay, I will just zoom it a little more. Okay, so the useState, right, actually returns a array, okay, of these two values. So we are not, it should not be a flower braces where it doesn't return it like that. It returns an array of two values. Okay, just that was the issue here. Okay, let me try now. Now it should work. Okay, if you do it like that, it has to return object so that you can take these two objects, but it is returning an array, so you have to do it like this. Now let's see whether it works. Let me go to this page and let me. So now you can see the hello, the default value. Here if you want to change, you can change. Now you are able to see the value, right? Let me also inspect so that and show you the re-rendered thing. So if you do like this, okay, I have removed that console log. I will have it so that I can show you. Okay. So when you type anything, you can see that. So every time the state changes, this complete component gets re-rendered. That's what I wanted to. That's why I put a console log here to show you that every time this input state changes, okay, we are in the on change, we are doing a set input state. So that will change the state. When the state changes, as we have it in the class component, we do it with set state. When we change the state here using set input state also, this complete functional components gets re-rendered. Okay. Hope you understood this set state. Okay. So the set state, as I told you, it is primarily was brought as a React hook to have that state functionality in functional component. So we will see about useEffect React hook. So first to understand why useEffect, okay, why you need this useEffect React hook, as you know, necessity of mother of invention. So what made this useEffect in functional component? Because I assume that you know that the lifecycle methods are available only for class components. It is not available for functional components. So functional components cannot use those functionalities. So because of lifecycle methods, I will just give you a heads up on lifecycle methods. Okay, the lifecycle methods are, these are the lifecycle methods which are present in React class components. So the lifecycle methods, if you see, there are 6 lifecycle methods. So by using this methods, if you have this inside your class component, it will be called by React at that particular moment of the component. That is, when the components get mounted, the component did mount will call. Before it gets mounted, the component will mount will get called. And likewise, component will receive props will get called when the component receives some properties. And should component update will make you decide whether the component should update or not. Okay, and component did update after the component updates, and component will unmount will get called when the component is going to get unmounted. So these are the functionalities you can do in a functional class component in React. That is, you can have a functionality which has to run only after the component mounts, or when the components unmounts you want a functionality, and when the component updates you want a functionality using component did update. So these functionalities were not possible to be done in a functional component. The functional component always had to rely on class component. So with the introduction of React hooks, what they brought out, so they brought out a lifecycle, they brought a React hook, useEffect React hook, by which these are possible in functional components also. Whatever you were able to achieve using lifecycle methods in a class component could be done using useEffect in functional components as well. Okay. So as I told you, so useEffect is, as the name says, it is a effect of a render or update. That's why the name as useEffect. So from the effect of a render or update, you want to do some functionalities. Like once the component updates, on the component mounts, I want to do a functionality like I will call to the server. So that's why the name useEffect. Effect of a render of update. So the useEffect hook is called to be a combined effect of component did mount, did update, and component will unmount. I told you did mount will get called when the component mounts. Did update will get called when the component updates, and the component will unmount will get called when the component gets destroyed or unmounted. Okay. So these are the I have just described what are the functionalities you achieved because of lifecycle methods in a class component. We will see each one of them, each one by one, how we can achieve the same functionality using useEffect in case of React hook, that is useEffect React hook. Once we complete all the 4 functionalities what I have listed down, you will be we will see a common use case how you can use useEffect. Okay, so the first functionality is run on every update. For every update you want to run something, maybe it can be a log, you want to see a log which gets printed for every update. Okay, a simple use case. So let's go to our VS Code. So this is our VS Code. Right now it has a functionality. If I go to the browser, you can see that it has a functionality to just display a input button. Okay, this I have done using useState. So this in this input button, I am just trying to I have used useState, and I am able to input whatever values I want into this input button, input element. Okay. Now let us use useEffect. Okay, so to use useEffect, you have to put useEffect, get it auto imported from React, and whatever you have to write a function inside where you write the functionality what should happen for a effect of render or update. Okay, maybe I'm saying that I want to call console log print, maybe print sample or something. on every render. Okay. So when you have it like this, right, you write just a statement without you are not writing anything here. So this statement now will execute on every render. Whenever this component gets re-rendered, this this particular console log will happen, because for every render. Okay, so when the render will happen, whenever somebody enters some value in this input element, because we have used useState. If you are not sure about useState, I will recommend you to see my previous session on useState. Okay, so whenever the state changes, this component will be re-rendered. So whenever the component gets re-rendered, this useEffect will happen. Okay, so this happens when you don't put any put anything here. You don't put it like this. When you don't put it like this, it will happen on every re-render. We can just go to the browser and check that. Okay. So let me run it now. Okay, let me clear it. So whenever I type some element here, the state is going to change. So we should be seeing that whatever our console logs. You are able to see that console log. So every time the component re-renders, this will happen. This whatever you put inside the useEffect, that functionality will get executed. So we have done this to execute the first step. Run on every render. That's what we try to do it now. Run on every render. Okay. And next use cases, next functionality is to run on component mount only. So component mount happens only once. Okay, when the component gets added to the DOM. So if I want to run a functionality only when the component gets mounted, what I need to do? So for that, what you need to do is you have to go here, add just like this. You are actually saying that I have no dependencies. So run only on the component only when the component mounts. Okay, this is similar to putting this functionality in component did mount. Okay, so we are supposed to put the dependencies here, saying when this dependency change, you have to call this function. Right now I am saying I have no dependencies. Okay, so it will run only on component mount. Only when the component mounts, it will happen. Even if the value change, any value changes here, it will not affect this. It will not execute this statement because I have told it no dependencies. So let me check it now whether it happens. So now I will clear it. Okay, so if we rerun it, it should run once. So it ran once. Okay, now even if I change, it will not run. You are able to see we are not seeing that statement anymore because I have told it no dependency. So run it only once. So this statement will never execute even if the state changes, even if the component re-renders. The component re-renders because of the state change, the input state. The input state which we have used via the useState, because from useState we are getting a state that we have used in the input state, and we are changing the state by using onChange, which sets the set input state. Okay, now we have done the next requirement for ours. Next functionality was run on component mount, and the next functionality which was achieved by lifecycle methods was to decide whether a update need to happen. This we decide using component should component update. So there we can say if this value changes, don't update. We can return a false boolean, return false. So in that case, the component update will not happen. So that also we can do it using onEffect. Okay, useEffect we can do it. Okay, let me create one another state. Okay, to make you understand this, I'm creating one more state. Okay, let me let it be ABC or something. So let it be input state 2 and set input state 2, and I will just copy this. I'm creating one more input element with this state. Okay, so let it be input state 2 here, and let it set input state 2. Okay, so now I have created another input element. So now I want to say to useEffect that this functionality should happen only when the input state 2 changes. If somebody types in this input element, then you do this functionality. Execute this line. If the input state 1, this input changes, you don't do anything. You don't execute this line. For that, what you have to do, you say that this useEffect is dependent on only input state 2. Okay, now I can also create a label here so that it is understandable. So I can say input 1. Okay, and likewise this is input 2. Okay, so now what I'm saying is, to useEffect, you should execute this functionality only when the input state 2 changes. You should not execute this functionality when input state 1 changes, or anything else changes, you don't execute. Okay, so let me check it in the browser now whether it works. Go to the browser. So now we are seeing two input elements. Okay, we can actually put it in a div so that it comes down. Okay, so now let's, it is more understandable, I think so. Maybe. So now I have two input. Now I've added a functionality in useEffect that you do the change, you execute that line console log only when the input 2 changes. Okay, let me do it. Now you can see whenever I change input 2, this print sample on every render is happening, right? So it is doing correctly. Now let us check if I change input 1 whether it is happening. So you can see that is not never getting printed. Can understand? So this is how we can control whether useEffect functionality, whatever you put inside the useEffect, should run on which change. Well, on maybe input state 1 changes, you don't execute my functionality. If input state 2 changes, then only you execute this functionality. So you can control a functionality from happening in functional component. Okay, so this is how it is achieved using useEffect. Now run on component unmount. Okay, this is more interesting. So when you want to run a functionality on unmount, okay, what you have to do is, in useEffect you have to return that item. So this functionality, what will do is, this functionality, okay, this functionality will run when next cycle of useEffect. That is, maybe I put a console log. I will say cleanup. You can use it for cleanup. So this functionality, this return, this function, you have to return it to useEffect. So this functionality will happen before the useEffect, the next cycle of useEffect starts, and it will also happen when the component unmounts. So in both the cases it will happen. Now whenever the input state 2 changes, this useEffect functionality will happen, right? So for every new cycle of useEffect running the functionality, it will run the functionality which was returned in the previous cycle. Okay, you're understanding? So when a new cycle of useEffect starts, it will execute the whatever was returned in the previous cycle. Okay, and this also will get executed when the component unmounts. Okay, we can see it in action. So this should execute every time the useEffect this functionality happens. Executes this functionality, whatever you put inside this. So let us check in our thing. So whenever I type something, you can see, whenever I type something, it runs the cleanup of the previous cycle, right? Okay, and this will also happen, cleanup will happen when the component unmounts also. When this component unmounts, that also will happen. The use case the use case which will which is prompt for this is like when you use a set timeout, right? You have several set timeouts. You can use this to clear the interval. Maybe the timeout has exceeded. You can use this cleanup for clearing the timeout of the previous cycle. Okay, you understand? Every time you do a set timeout for every useEffect cycle, so when the new set timeout starts, you can use this for clearing the set timeout of the previous cycle. Cycle in the sense the previous time the useEffect ran. Okay. Okay. This is how I think I covered all the cases. These are the 4 cases. Now the common use case why we use useEffect. The useEffect we mostly use for making calls to the server. Maybe you have a filter. Whenever the filter the user changes the filter, it has to go and call the server. So in this case, what I will do, I will remove this input 2. Input 2, and I will change it as search. Okay, whatever. So what I will do in this useEffect, instead of console log, I will put Axios. You have to import this Axios as well. Maybe you can import. So here I do a get to my local node server. So you need not know that node server simply returns a employees list. Okay, I'm not going inside the node server. It just understand that this node server returns a employees list. I'm using Axios to retrieve that list. So this will return a then. So inside the then you can actually, you will get a response here. You can actually print the response. response.data. Okay, so this is one of the common use case where we will use useEffect, that I go to the backend and receive the response.data. And one other thing I want to do is this useEffect, the call to the server should happen whenever the input state one changes. Input state changes. The input state is for this input element. Okay, remove this. Whenever the user changes the search, okay, it has to go to the server with the search parameter, right? So that is a common use case for useEffect. So whenever the input state changes, the input state will get changed whenever the user changes the value in the input element. So this useEffect will be called to go to the server with the search parameter to get the response, and using the response we will actually render that response on the UI screen. Okay, so let's see this example. Now I have searched something. So you can see whenever the user types something on the search, it goes to the server and gets the employee list. Okay, you're able to see. So this is one of the common use case where we use useEffect. Okay, hope this is clear. useEffect is clear why we use that. So to summarize, so useEffect, as the name says, it is to handle the effect of a render or update. Okay, so for bringing this functionality, when you want to do in a functional component, you want to do some functionality on render or update, or you want to do a particular functionality on only when a particular state changes, or you want to do a cleanup when the component unmounts, or on every cycle I want to do a cleanup. So in all these cases the useEffect can be used. And we also saw a common use case where we went to the server and fetched the data. We did this every time the input state, the filter search element changed. Okay, that is the search element. The search element changed, the input value changed, we went to the server and fetched the data and printed the data. Okay, now we are going to see about useReducer React hook. What is useReducer React hook? This useReducer may be confused to you if you don't know the reducer. Okay, so first let us see the reducer so that you understand how we are bringing in the reducer functionality inside a functional component. Okay, if you see a reducer functionality, it is like it is based on Flutt's design. Okay, so whenever, okay, as you see in the diagram, so the state, right? State is within the component. As per the Flutt's design, the state should not be within a component. It should be a separate entity. So the state will all be decided by the reducer. Okay. For changing any state, we have to tell by means of our component, we have to send actions, and the actions will get dispatched to the reducer. Okay, and the reducer will be creating the state and given to the component. So this is about reducer. So the reducer is the place which creates the state, which holds all the states, and whenever a component wants to change the state, it has to send actions to the reducer, and reducer, based on its logic, it will return the state of the application. So all the state will be within the reducer. Okay, this is called a store. Okay, whatever you see, this is called a store, and from the component we are sending actions, and it gets dispatched to the reducer, and it is creating the state and given to our component, as you see in this diagram. Now hope you understood what is a reducer. Okay, so now let's create this in our functional component. Okay, let's move to our functional component. Okay, so this is the file which I have been using. Okay, so if you want to see what I have done, okay, this is a simple application. Okay, if you go to my Chrome, let's see this. It is already, so if you put 3000, okay, so 3000 actually, whenever I type something, it goes to the server. So how it goes is, actually I have by means of useEffect or useState, I have used these two. If you have not seen that, I will recommend you to see those so that you understand the useState and useEffect. Okay, so by means of useEffect, what I am doing is, whenever this input button, right, this is my input text. Whenever the input text changes, the input state changes here. Okay, I am calling set input state, which is going to, since this will change the state, the input state, this will change the input state. So this functional component will re-render, and when it re-renders, by using useEffect, whenever the input state changes, I am going to call this node server API, okay, which is going to return me, since I have put a dependency on the input state, whenever the user types something into my input text, this useEffect, this is going to get called, and this is going to go to my server, and it is going to get the employees, print the employees here. This is what it happens. Okay, this is what you can see. Whenever you type something, the input state changes, so the useEffect calls call to the server. This call is getting called. If you see here, you can see here, right? You can see whenever I type something, the useEffect is going to call to the server, which is going to fetch me the employees list. Okay, it is going to fetch the employees list, which I am just printing here. So for making you understand reducer, what I am going to do is, my requirement is, whenever it goes to the server, right, I want to see the loading thing. Okay, I want to see the loading. I just maybe a text which shows loading, so that the user knows it goes to the server. This is what I am going to do it with help of useReducer. And when there is a error, maybe the server is down or something, I want to see the error here, whatever the server throws. For that, how we are going to do that? This is our thing for making useReducer understand. This is what we are going to do. So let us go to our project. So as I told you, right, as I told you in this diagram, the entire state of the application will be in reducer, and whenever I want to change the state of the application, I will send actions, right? So the first step for in useReducer is to create a reducer. Okay, maybe first let me create a reducer which will host, okay, all the states. Maybe here in this case, whether loading true, error false, that state will be handled by this reducer. Okay, maybe I will name it useReducer states. I'm just writing a reducer here, nothing else. Okay. So the reducer, as I told you, you have to send actions to the reducer, and we will be sending the initial state also. So the parameters of this reducer will be initial state and the actions. So based on the actions which we send to the reducer, it is going to return us that state. Okay. So let me use a switch here. So let me put actions dot type. So the first case will be when it is loading. We have to return maybe it can be loading or pending, loading true and error false. When the case is completed, it means I have to return this state, that is loading false, because since it has loaded already, and error false. In case if the server send us error, in that case we will be anyway dispatching error. In that case it has to return loading false, and we can say the error will be what it is sent to this. So it will be sent as action.payload. Okay. So we have written the states, the different states of this application. Okay. For using these states, okay, just for displaying the loading, okay, loading and the error, okay, we have created the 3 states here. Okay, now let us use those states. For using those states, we will write something useReducer. We have to, for using the states of the reducer, we have to use a React hook called useReducer. Okay. The first thing will be what the states we wrote, reducer states we wrote. That will be the first input to it. The second input will be the initial state of this initial state of the reducer states. For that, the initial state may be like loading true, loading false, and error also null, no error. Here also you can make it as no error. Sorry. So I have used the useReducer. The useReducer will be returning something called, okay, yeah, array. Okay, the first thing will be the states, the current state, the current reducer states. Maybe you can say HTTP states. The second one is the actions using which we will call the reducer. We can a hold, you can keep it as a hold, using which you are going to call the actions to the reducer, this reducer, because whenever it is loading, we will call dispatch loading. Whenever it is completed, we will say dispatch completed, likewise. Okay, so here, okay, this is where that call goes to the server. So before the call goes, we can say, because here it is going to go, the call is going to go, so we can use dispatch I can say the type is completed, right? Pending loading, because it is going to load. Once the call completes, I can say dispatch completed, right? In case if there is a error, you can in the promise you can have another callback which is for error, and you can say dispatch type error, because this is the action type we have mentioned in the reducer. So we are just sending these actions from the component. So when we send this action, the reducer will go through the switch, and for that particular action it will return the state of this application, the loading state of this application. Okay, and here I have to also send payload, because what is the error, because I want to show it that also. So I can just say error. Maybe I don't know what error it sends, so we can say that error. Now to display the HTTP state, right, because our requirement is to show loading whenever it goes to the server, right? For that, let me add one more thing. Okay, so when the HTTP states is loading, when the loading is true, what I'm doing, I'm going to show one div, a simple div saying in loading. That's my requirement, right? Okay, says unreachable code. Maybe after this input button you can have that. Okay, so now I think so we have created the reducer, we have created the useReducer hook for using the reducer states what we created, and we have called also for any action to the server, we also dispatch the action. If the loading, we said loading completed and error. So this, based on the whatever we send the actions, this state should change. Whenever it is loading, it should say loading true or false based on what we set it here. So let's go to that program, see whether it is working now. Okay, so let me type something here. You are able to see the loading which comes for some short time, right? Because it goes to the server. You are able to see. So now it is working, and loading goes away once it is completed. That is, it goes to this place, right? Because we are saying type completed. And for checking the error, what I can do is I can close my server. I stop the server now. Now let's check. We should be able to see the error if I am correct. We are not able to see the error, right? For that error, maybe we have to write something else. Okay. So this is only for loading. If you want to see the error, we have to write, you will write HTTP states. Maybe if there is no error, it will not show the error. If there is a error, it will show the error, right? Now let's check whether we are able to see the error, right? We are getting an issue here. Maybe we will make this as error. I am not sure. This is the error. So we are able to see that, right? The error. It shows the error here, right? But maybe if you try to print the error, maybe we can understand why there is an error here. Maybe I think you have to send the error.message. Okay, you have to send the error.message so that it shows that here, I think so. So now let's see whether we are able to see. So you are able to see network error, right? We are getting a network error. That's what the error it is. Okay. So maybe we can make it down if you want. Just put it inside a div. Okay, now let's see, it should come down. So whenever we type, it should be loading and we should be seeing the network error. And you can also make it red if you want. Okay, hope you understood the useReducer. So what we did to summarize is, we first created the reducer states and we wrote the useReducer React hook to use the state. Okay. And we also wrote the initial state for the reducer, and the useReducer will return HTTP states and dispatch. So the HTTP states is the current state of the reducer, and dispatch is for a hold to send actions to the reducer. So using this, we send actions in the useEffect. Whenever before we are going to call, we made it loading, and after the call was completed, we made it completed. And when we received a error, we dispatched the error and the error message also to the reducer, so that it was able to return that particular state to reflect the action what we sent. Okay, and we also displayed the loading. Okay, loading we display, and we also displayed the error in our. We'll see about useRef React hook now. So use reference, okay, as the definition says, it returns a mutable reference object. Those current value is initialized to what you pass to useRef. And so the useRef React hook is for use for referencing a DOM node. Okay, if you add this reference to any DOM element, you can access this DOM node. Okay, so let us maybe this may be confusing by definition. Let us see it by example. Okay, so this is my thing where I have only a input element. Okay, I have an input element. If you see in browser, it is set to 0. This is what I have. Okay, now I am interested to refer this DOM node. Okay, this input element, I want to refer this DOM of this input element. For that, let me create a useRef. Okay, useRef. So this has to be auto imported from React, as you see here. We have done it. And let me do it with null, initialize with the null. Okay, as the definition says, right, this useRef will return a mutable reference object, which will live till the lifetime of the component. Just understand that. Okay, so this useRef will return is a JavaScript object. Okay, with the current value. By default, since I have initialized with null, it will be initialized with null. Okay, this is how it would have got created. Okay, so this object will live for the complete. This object will be the same for the entire, not for every DOM change or nothing. This object will not be recreated. This object will stay till the lifetime of the component. Only the value which will change is this null when we make it refer to a DOM element. Okay, understand? So now I can use this in any DOM element. Now since I want to access this DOM element, I am putting using the refer equal to input E1, what got returned here. Okay, I just put in this. Now whenever this DOM node changes, right, this null value will be changed with this DOM element. Every time this gets changed, it will be changed with this DOM element. Okay, for seeing that, let me add a button. Okay, button, and I will maybe with click. Okay, something. So on click, I will display this input E1 so that I can see what gets changed, right? So on click. Okay, keep enter. Okay, so let me have a function here which gets called on click of it. On button click, I can have. Let this be a function which has something. Okay, so here, so I will just on click of this, I will just call this on button click. Okay, I will call this button click. Inside on button click, let's see the input E1. So as I told you, the input E1's current will change with this DOM element every time this DOM element gets changed. Okay, so let's console log input E1 first. Whether the input E1's current value gets changed, maybe you can also put try to print input even dot current itself, so that we can see whether this current gets changed with this DOM node. Okay, let's go to the browser. Okay. We can say input type button. That will be type equal to button. It is a JSX. Okay. Now we are the input button. Okay. Say value equal to click. Now we got it right. So it has to be changed like this. Now the value, we are seeing something. So every time this input element, I have set a state. Okay, whenever the state changes, I am calling set input value 1, which is going to change the state. Okay, because I am using useState, and it gets initialized with this input value 1, the 0 value, and whenever the user changes state, this onChange will get called and the state will change, so the functional component will re-render. Okay, to show the new element. Okay, so if you go here and see, whenever I click right, you see the input element E1, the current value is input value 022. Whenever I change it, it changes it, right? You can also try to do value here. So you can see, right, the value. So this current points to the input, the DOM element, because we have used the refer here. This input E1 dot current get changed with the whenever this DOM element changes, right? Maybe whenever we change the value in this DOM element, this DOM element changes. So the refer made sure that the input E1 dot current get initialized with the changed DOM element. So the input E1 dot current points to this DOM element. Okay, this refer the input elements DOM element. So since we have the DOM element here, we can do anything what we want. We can access the value, or we can change even the background color. Also we can change it. Maybe we can say input even dot current. Current is the DOM element. Okay, the input elements DOM element. So here you can change style dot background color. Okay, here change it to yellow. Now every time we click it, it should change to yellow. Okay, let's see that. So the value should be what we typed here, and when we click on it, you should see the DOM, that particular DOM, because the input E1's current will get initialized with the current DOM of this input element. Okay, so now if you see, the value of the DOM is the value what we typed, and even the style got changed to yellow, the background color got changed to yellow. Okay, hope you are able to understand this. Okay, the useRef is basically used for accessing the node, accessing the DOM node where you have put the refer and the useRef return value. The input E1 is the useRef return object. Wherever you put this refer attribute and the input E1, that DOM node, you can access it in input E1.current. Okay. Hope you understood. Thank you guys. We will say about useMemo React hook. So useMemo, if you take this React hook, actually maybe it returns you a memoized value. Okay, maybe it can be used in cases when you are going to do a complex operation with two values, and it does not make sense of doing this complex operation without any change of the value. So in that case, useMemo can be used. So in useMemo, what it takes is, it takes a dependency array, where you can say if these two dependency array don't change, you just return whatever the value which was previously returned. If any of these dependency changes only, we will be doing that operation, whatever is mentioned inside useMemo, and returning a new value. Else, unless the dependency don't change, we will be returning the old memoized value. This is about useMemo. To make you understand this with a simple example, let me go ahead to my React application. So this is a simple application with right now returns hello. Okay. Now for making you understand, let me create two use states. Okay, value 1 and value 2. I'm just creating two states now. Okay, the first one, let it be with 0. Okay, sorry. Maybe as you know, if you don't know useState, I would recommend you to see that useState. Okay, my previous tutorial on useState, which I will be also adding in one of the cards. You should be seeing that. So let this be input value 1. And set input value 1. And I will create one more state with input value 2. And now, okay, I am going to write a useMemo with these two dependencies, input value 1 and input value 2. Also, let me create two input elements with this input value 1 and input value 2. Okay, how you will create it is just, since we are returning multiple elements, you enclose it with this brackets, and we will put input, okay, value equal to input value 1. Okay, input value 1, and on change, if the user changes it, I'm changing the value of it. Okay, whatever it comes, whatever comes, okay, I'm changing the input state. I'm using set input value 1 so that I change the state. Okay, so I will get it from event target dot value. Likewise, you just copy it for input value 2 also. can actually close it. Okay. You change set input value to. Now we have created the two input elements. Let's go to the browser and check whether they got created. So it got created. Maybe you can enclose it in a div so that it comes in a new line. Okay. And then you can actually add a CSS so that it comes in the middle also. So I will import this CSS also. /app CSS. We have that app.css, I think so. Okay. Now it has come in the middle. This is the value 1 and this is the value 2. Maybe for the sum also you can create one more input element. Okay. Maybe you can create a label for this. Label input 1 input 2. So input 1 and input 2 we can create, and for the sum, okay, so let me also add a thing for the sum. Okay, so before that let me create a useMemo React hook. I will use the useMemo React hook which will return the sum. Okay, so you can have something called custom sum. Okay, and use useMemo React hook which will sum these two values. Okay, and we have to return. I am just returning parseInt the input value 1 plus parseInt input value 2. Okay, this will now return the sum. So this sum you can actually display it down. You can actually call this function. This is a function, right? You can actually call this function sum. So now I have written the sum function. This sum function will call this useMemo function. Okay, useMemo function which will return the sum of these input value 1 and input value 2. If you go and check now, let us check now. So it should be written in 0, I think so. but we have not defined useMemo. Let's define that also. So useMemo should be from React. Okay. Okay, now I have imported. Now let's check whether it is working. It is saying sum is not a function, right? Just try this. So in useMemo you need not call it as a function. If you just call this useMemo, it will return the value. Okay. So now if I put 1 here, it should be 1 here. If I put 1 here, it should be 1 here. Okay. So whatever, whenever it refreshes, right, this returns the new value. Okay. Maybe I can put a console log here to show you that it goes inside this function. Okay. I have put some function called. Okay. And every time the state changes, automatically what happens? The function gets re-render. Function gets re-render, and this calculation happens. The useMemo, this it tries to execute the function and return the value. Since in useMemo we have not put any dependency, every time this logic happens, this logic runs and it tries to find the sum from these two values. Okay, if you see here, if I go to console, if I put here, it gets called. The function gets called and executed, and then based on that it tries to sum. So every time this logic happens to retrieve the sum value. Okay, even if we put 2 here, it will return the sum. Okay, now this is correct, but because this input we have only 2 values, right? So whenever this changes, we have to execute this function to retrieve the value. Maybe I will create one more state now, maybe a sample state. Okay. Okay, I have created one more state, sample value. Okay, on which this sum function is not dependent on. Okay, let me also add an input state input element for that. Okay, and sample input something. Okay, and let this be whatever it returned. Set sample value, send sample value, set sample value. Okay, now go to our browser. We have one more input. Okay, sample input. Now if you see, even when you change this, this gets called, the useMemo function gets called, and it is trying to find the sum of input 1 and input 2, but input 1 and input 2 has not changed. But this is not necessary, right? If you change sample input, why the sum function gets called? For that we can just return the memoized value which is present. When the input 1 and input 2 has not changed, we can just return the previous value, right? So for that, what you have to do in useMemo, you have to give a dependency. You execute this function only if this input value 1 and input value 2 changed. Okay. Don't execute this function if none of these dependencies change. If this input value 1 input value 2 changes, only you call this function and try to find the sum. Okay. If any of the else changes, you just return the old value, old return value which was returned from this function. Okay, that's it. Now we have given dependency to useMemo. So now let's try to check it. So if input value 1 changes, it gets called. That's correct. Input value 2 changes, it gets called. That's all correct. But when sample input gets called, it should not get called. So it is not getting called. It is just returning the whole value. Okay, you understand? Just returning the whole value. Because since the useMemo function we wrote is only dependent on the input value 1 and 2, we are gave a dependency that it should execute the function and try to find the sum only if input value 1 and input value 2 changes. If any of the for any other reason, if the state gets changed and any other state gets changed and the function re-renders, it should return the old value only. Old value, the old memoized value which was returned from this sum, since we have used useMemo. Okay, hope you understood. useMemo, as I told you, it just returns the old memoized value if none of the dependency, if none of its own dependency changes. If only if the dependencies provided to it changes, it will try to execute its function and find the return value and return the new sum which it calculated. Okay, hope you understood. Let us see about useCallback. So okay, if you know useMemo, useCallback is similar to that. If you have not seen no useMemo, I'll recommend you to see that. Okay, maybe my previous session on useMemo, it would be helpful for you to understand useCallback also. So in case of functions in JavaScript or objects, right? They call it as function objects. Okay. So what useCallback does it is you specify a dependency in useCallback also. So if the dependency changes only, it will create a new object for the function. Else it will return the old object, old function object. You understand? So the new function object will be returned by useCallback only if the dependencies you specify to useCallback changes. Else it is going to return the memoized callback only. That's what, memoized function object only. So it is not going to create a new function object for you since your dependency don't change. Let's try to understand it with the example. So in this case I have it is simple. I have two use states, input value 1, input value 2. Okay, and I have created two input elements for this states, and in your browser you are seeing input 1 and input 2 with some value. So let us create a useCallback. Let us create with the help of useCallback. Let us create a function now. Okay, useCallback. So this has to be imported. Okay, and and I am not given any. So what I am going to do? Let it be a sample function. Okay, I am just putting it into a sample function. Inside useCallback, I am just going to do a console log. Okay, and I'm going to print input values. I'm going to try to print both the input value 1 and input value 2. Okay, input value 1 plus, let me so as you can see the difference, I'm putting it input value 1, and after that with colon I'm separating it and put input value 2 also. Okay, I'm putting these two values, so I'm just printing these two values. Okay, maybe you can have a space here. Okay, and let's call this sample function here. So this sample function will be called, maybe put it in a label, put inside a div. Okay, and have a label, and here you call this sample function. So this sample function will get called whenever the function component re-renders. Okay, whenever any state changes, this functional component is going to re-render. So this sample function will get called. Let's go to the browser now. So every time the refresh happens, this should get called because we are calling this sample function. Okay, let's go here. So we are seeing that, right? Now if I change this, you are seeing the value 1 0. First it was nothing, now 1 0. If I change here also, it will be 1 1. So as you saw here, the new function, as we till now we saw that whenever the value changes, right, whenever the value change the value of input 1 or input 2, a new function object gets created, right? And the new function object is able to reflect the new values of input 1 and input 2. So this is how it normally happens. Every time if you have a simple function in your functional component, every time the functional component gets re-rendered, your new function objects gets created, and it is able to reflect the changed input changed state in your functional component. Okay, but this can be changed with the help of useCallback. Okay, we can restrict the functional object creation. We can say that the new functional object should be created only if the input value 1 changes. So when I say like this, you are saying to useCallback that you create a new functional object only when the input value 1 changes. If input value 2 changes, you don't care, you just return the whole functional object which you created earlier. That is what we call memoized callback. Whole functional object gets created. So what happens because of this, even if you change input value 2, it will be returning your new whole functional object which will be having the old input value 1 and input value 2. It will not reflect the new input value 2 because this functional object, whenever this functional object was created, it will be reflecting that input value 1 and input value 2. Now let's see that in the browser. Okay, if you have this like this, as I told you, for 2 2, it will create a new functional object, so it will be able to reflect the new change of input 1. But if you change input 2, okay, it will not reflect the new input 2, because for any change of input value 2, we don't care. and we are just, the use callback will return the whole functional object. The whole functional object will reflect the old input 1 and input 2, because we didn't create a new functional object with the new value of input 1 and 2. Okay, so that's why even if I change the input 2, it just reflects the old input 2 values, because the new functional object did not get created with the new value of input 2. So this is what the use callback is used for. It is used for giving you a memoized callback, memoized function object. By this way, we can it may give you a performance benefit, so that we are not unnecessarily creating functional objects. Okay, hope you understood. Thank you, guys. We will see about context API in React hooks. So if you see in React, right, if you have many levels of components, maybe you have one component, and within that there is another component, and within that you have another component. If you want to pass the data from one component to the third component, you have A, B, C. If I want to pass the value from A to C, you have to put props everywhere. So this is called as props drilling. Okay, this was a big issue actually. If you have 4 levels of components, if I want to send the data from first level to the 4th level, you have to put props everywhere and send the data. So this was called as props drilling. To avoid this only, this context API context was created in React hooks. So using context, you can make sure that once you create the context and provide the context, you create a provider and you put the component, maybe a component within the user provider. This data, whatever you have it in user context, can be easily be accessible in componency. Maybe you have 4 levels of component. The parent component, you put it inside user provider. This context can be easily, without any no need to put props anywhere. So this data can be easily accessed by the last level of components, the 4th level or C component, without doing anything. You just need to put it inside user provider, and the 4th level can easily consume that context by using useContext. So let us see, understand this with the example. So in case of context, there are 4 steps what I have done. First, we have to create the context. Okay, let us create a context first. Let me go here. So it is always preferable to do it by creating a folder. Okay, maybe I will call it user context. Maybe have it context folder or something. It will be simple. This is not a folder. Maybe I'm not sure I created a folder. Okay, so let me have it as context folder. Inside this, you create a context. Okay, maybe name it user context. Okay, .js. We have to create a context. For creating a context, you have to use create context hook from React. Okay, just do like this. Create context. Maybe put it inside user context. No. You have to say the context what value it should have. Maybe I can say that it should have maybe a username and set username. Set username. Maybe this set username. This is for setting the content, setting the username. Okay. Set username Okay, this can be a function. Okay. Now we can export this user context. Export, this can be a default also. Now we have created a user context. Now go into the next step. Somebody has to provide the logic for this context, right? Somebody has to write the logic. How? Because this is just a function. You have to write the logic for how to set the username. So somebody has to provide the context. So now let's proceed with writing the provider. Okay. Maybe I will simply write it user provider. Okay. Okay. Now this should return me a user provider. The provider can be written for this context like this dot provider. Okay. And this provider should provide a value for this context what I created. Okay. For providing, for writing the logic how to set the username and password username, we have only a single username. Let me create a useState here. useState. Okay. Maybe I will set it with some ABC value. Okay. That maybe let it be initial value and let it return the user value and set user value. Now what I am going to do for this username, I am going to say for the username, this username, it should be the same. For this username, I am providing the logic, right? For username, I am saying you use the user value of this state. User value of this state. And for set username, you provide the for set username you provide this set user value. Use this set user value which is returned from useState for setting the username. Okay. Now I have provided the logic, and here we have to write something like, because the user provider we will be putting inside maybe you put a props here, props.children we will write, because the user inside user provider we will write the all the components where we want the context to be consumed. Okay. Dot children. Okay. Now export this as well. Export, we can just write it here. Now I have created the context, and I also have created a provider for that context which will be providing the logic. Okay. For the how to set the username and from where the username will be taken. So it will be taken from the state created in this user provider. useState created in this user provider. Okay. So we have done with these first two steps. Now you can put the provider inside this. Okay. You can put the provider. Actually I have done that, but just for showing you, redo it. So you have to import the provider. This is my index.js. I'm saying you have to, since it is not a default import, you have to do it like this. And from user context, allow it. Okay. And you have to put the app1. I'm saying all the components inside app1 should be able to use this context. The app1 is my this is the only component which is the main component which I have. So I am putting it app1 inside this user provider, which I have imported from the context, user context, where we created that. Okay. Just put app1 here. Okay. So let me do that now. User provider in root. Now for explaining this project, right, what I have done is, maybe if you go to the browser, one more thing we missed, because this is a functional, user provider is a functional component. So you have to do import React from React. Okay. Now if you see this, something should come. Yes. I have just created one simple thing. So to show you how the prop drilling happens, okay. So this app1 has a user dashboard functional component. Okay, user dashboard. It actually renders this user dashboard component. To this user dashboard, I have created a useState. Okay, I have created a useState which I am using in the input element. Whenever the input element changes, this user state is passed to the user dashboard functional component. So in my project, I have two functional components, user dashboard and user dashboard 1, and app1 is also a functional component. So from the app1, I am passing the this whatever this user state user state value which I have created using useState, which I have been using in the input element. Okay, that state I am passing to this user dashboard. Okay, and this from the user dashboard again through props I am passing the data to user dashboard 1, and the user dashboard 1 displays this this user state which I have created through useState. Okay, so you can see the props. So from to the user dashboard, first I'm sending the user state as props, and the user dashboard again sends this data as props to user dashboard 1, and the user dashboard 1 displays this username. Okay, hope you understand. So using context, we are just trying to avoid this props drilling, which is happening from app1. From app1 we are passing the user state to user dashboard, and from user dashboard again we are passing the user state data to user dashboard 1. Now let's see how we can avoid it using context. Okay, so we have done all these 3 steps. Now we have to consume the context. For consuming the context, what we have to do is we have to use useContext. Okay, the useContext can be we can use useContext. Okay, and in useContext we have to, as a parameter, we have to say userContext what we created. Okay, that has to be imported, and the useContext also we imported. Now this will return two values. It will return whatever we specified there in our we specified in that context. We have specified username and set username, right? Username and set username, right? These two values it will return whenever you use useContext, userContext. Okay, it will return username and set username. That one we can try to, it will return that. So the name should be same, username and set username. So this will return both. Now using set username, we can set the context. Set username. We don't need a state anymore. We can actually comment the state, and using the context with the, we can set the username now. Set username. You pass the username here. We can use. And in set username, we can pass event.target.value. The event which gets passed from onChange. Okay. Now I've used the context, username, the state returned from the context, username, and set username for setting the context, and username I am getting it from the context. Now this is all not needed because we can, within the user provider, we can easily retrieve the props, easily retrieve the context. No need to send it through props. We can remove all this. Okay, this also we can remove it now. Okay. Now using this, I have set the value in the context. At first it was hello. Okay, it's by default I think we have set ABC. Now we have set it to whatever the user types. We have set the context. We have changed the context here. Now we can consume the context. Similarly, we can use useContext here also. Here, no need of changes here. Okay, this is the intermediate component. Just in the component where we need the context, we can just use this. Okay, we are not going to set username here. We are just going to retrieve the username which is set in the context. Okay. So we can set this context. This also need to be imported. User context. And no need of props and all here. Just you can retrieve the username here. And retrieve the username here. Okay. Now let's see. Now we have removed all the props, and we have what we have done is, here we have set the context. We have retrieved the context and set that username in the context. Okay. Consume the context and set the username in the context. Now from user dashboard 1 we are retrieving the context what we set in app 1. Without we have removed all the props, we are directly doing that. Now let's see whether it is working. So in user dashboard 1 it is saying 9th line the name is not present, so sorry, it should be this one, some spelling mistake, typo error. Now let's see whether it works. Now it is working, right? By default what is there in the context we see, so we are able to see that in our user dashboard 1. If we change anything here, you can see that it is changing automatically without need for props. Okay, right? Hope you understand. Whatever we set it in the context, we retrieve from that context and set it is accessible in user dashboard 1 without sending the data as props from app 1 to user dashboard and from user dashboard to user dashboard 1 as props. Understand, right? So else what you would have done, you have to send the data, this username data to user dashboard, and here again we have to send it that username as props from user dashboard 1, from user dashboard to user dashboard 1 as props, and from this props we would have retrieved the username. This would happen. Now it got simple with useContext. Okay, so basically context API is used to prevent this props drilling issue what we faced in React. Thank you guys, hope you understood. Thank you.